55 SAS troops were meant to fly from Ascension Island, land Hercules transports in Argentina, and attack the Super Étendards and their crews and destroy the Exocet missiles. But the raid never began. A reconnaissance patrol disappeared into fog. Its commander decided they had been compromised, and the evidence does not establish that Argentina had actually found them. Operation Mikado is often remembered as an SAS raid on Argentina. It was never that. It was Britain's proposed answer to a weapon that had already shown it could reach the Royal Navy from the Argentine mainland, the AM39 Exocet missile. On 4 May 1982, an Argentine Navy Super Étendard launched an AM39 Exocet at HMS Sheffield in the South Atlantic. 20 members of Sheffield's crew died. The destroyer didn't sink until 10 May, while under tow, but the strike changed the campaign immediately. A French-made missile had crossed open sea, found a British warship, and put it out of action. Britain's carriers, HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, were the centre of the entire expedition. Lose either carrier, and the plan to retake the Falkland Islands became far more difficult. The threat came from a very small force. Argentina had received 5 Super Étendards and 5 AM39 Exocets from France before an arms embargo stopped further deliveries. 4 of the aircraft were operational during the war. Yet a handful of aircraft, each able to carry 1 sea-skimming missile, forced the British to think about attacking a target far beyond the islands. That target was Base Aeronaval Rio Grande, Almirante Hermes Quijada, in Tierra del Fuego. Rio Grande lay on Argentine mainland territory, roughly 400 miles west of the Falklands. It was home to the Argentine Naval Aviation's Segunda Escuadrilla Aeronaval de Caza y Ataque, the 2nd Naval Fighter Attack Squadron. Its Super Étendards had operated from the base because Argentina's aircraft carrier, ARA 25 de Mayo, wasn't ready to use them in combat. The geography made Mikado extraordinary. British forces had raided Argentine positions on the islands. Rio Grande was something else entirely, a naval air station on sovereign Argentine territory near the southern tip of South America and close to Chile. Britain wasn't considering a hit-and-run raid against an isolated outpost. It was considering landing transport aircraft at an Argentine military airbase, destroying aircraft and missiles on the ground, and then trying to get the raiders out through Chile. That was the pressure behind Operation Mikado. The main reported version of the plan called for 2 RAF Lockheed C-130K Hercules transports to carry approximately 55 men from B Squadron, 22 SAS. The force would stage from Ascension Island, fly south with aerial refueling support from RAF Victor tankers, then descend into a low-level approach designed to reduce Argentine radar warning. A Hercules isn't a stealth aircraft. It's a 4-engine transport built to move troops and cargo. Mikado asked 2 of them to fly a long-range penetration mission at night, descend close to the sea, and arrive at Rio Grande with enough fuel and enough surprise to land on its main runway. Planning versions changed. Some accounts name 25 men, others give 60 or even 70. Some describe a later concept involving 1 Hercules rather than 2. The familiar 2-aircraft 55-man plan is best understood as a principal planning version, not an unchanging final order. But its intended mechanics were clear. The Hercules aircraft were to land on Rio Grande's runway and keep their engines running. SAS troops would disembark, strike the Super Étendards, destroy the remaining Exocet missiles, and target the pilots associated with the force. Some plans included fuel, radar, control facilities, ground crews, and the runway itself. The aircraft, missiles, and trained pilots were the core targets. If the transports survived, they were expected to fly west to Chile, commonly identified as Punta Arenas. If they couldn't leave, the surviving SAS troops and aircrew would have to escape over land. The Chilean border was roughly 50 miles away. A map makes the gamble visible. Ascension Island sits in the mid-Atlantic. Rio Grande lies at the bottom of Argentina, almost at the southern edge of the continent. Between them lay thousands of miles of ocean, tanker rendezvous, radar coverage, weather, and an airfield defended by a military force on home ground. The plan had echoes of earlier Special Forces raids on airfields and of the 1976 Entebbe rescue. But Rio Grande wasn't Entebbe. There would be no friendly hostages waiting inside a terminal. There would be an Argentine naval base, anti-aircraft weapons, radar, security troops, and the possibility that the very weapons Britain had come to destroy might not be where British planners expected them to be. Brigadier Peter de la Billière, then director of the SAS, was closely associated with Micado's planning. B Squadron trained for a runway assault. RAF crews rehearsed low-level night approaches and landings. But the men expected to carry out the operation had grave reservations. The men expected to carry out the operation understood that they might be killed or captured. The operation was an attempt to save Britain's capital ships at the possible cost of the SAS force sent to destroy the missile threat. Those doubts weren't simply fear of combat, they were questions about intelligence. Where exactly were the Super Étendards? Where were the Exocets stored? How much warning would Argentine radar give? Could two fully laden Hercules transports really land at a defended mainland airbase before the defenders reacted? The answer began with a smaller mission, one that would never attract the same attention as the imagined C-130 assault. Operation Plum Duff. Plum Duff was reconnaissance for Mikado. A small SAS patrol was to get close enough to Rio Grande to observe the airbase, confirm the position and activity of the Super Étendards, assess defences, and report back. Some accounts say the team was also expected to establish a navigation aid for the follow-on Hercules approach. Its essential task was simpler and more important. Give Mikado eyes on the ground. Captain Andrew "Andy" Legg of B Squadron, 22 SAS, commanded the patrol. Most detailed accounts identify a team of 8 SAS men, though published numbers range from 3 to 9. The patrol was small because the aircraft that carried it had almost no margin to spare. The insertion platform was a Royal Navy Westland Sea King HC-4, serial ZA-290. It was stripped down for range and flown by Lieutenant Richard Hutchings of the Royal Marines, Lieutenant Alan Bennett, known as Wiggy, and aircrewman Pete Imrie. The Sea King was launched from HMS Invincible during the night of 17th and 18th May 1982. Detailed accounts place its departure shortly after midnight on the 18th May. It wasn't a normal helicopter mission. The Sea King had to fly nearly to the limit of its range, carry its SAS passengers across the South Atlantic, approach Tierra del Fuego at low level, then continue into Chile after the insertion. It didn't have the fuel to return to the British task force. Hutchings later described the mission as a literal example of the fog of war. His phrase wasn't metaphorical. Fog would shape every part of Plum Duff. The Sea King flew low to reduce the chance of radar detection. At low level, darkness and weather could remove the pilot's visual references. Flying higher might have made navigation easier, but it would also have increased exposure to Argentine radar. As the helicopter neared Tierra del Fuego, it encountered an offshore gas installation. A burning flare appeared ahead in the darkness. The crew had to divert, costing time and fuel. Then the fog closed in. Near the coast, visibility dropped to less than a mile in some accounts. The Sea King's crew were using night vision goggles, but fog scatters light and erases landmarks. A coastline becomes uncertain. A route becomes uncertain. A planned landing zone becomes a shape on a map with no reliable point on the ground. One widely repeated version places the helicopter 12 miles from the intended drop-off point when conditions became too poor to continue. Other accounts say 7 miles, 20 miles, or roughly 20 kilometers. The exact displacement remains disputed. What is firmly established is that the team didn't reach its intended reconnaissance point near Rio Grande. Hutchings later recalled reaching the moment when remaining airborne no longer seemed safe. He couldn't climb above the fog without risking radar detection. He couldn't continue beneath it without reliable visual references. He landed the Sea King because it was the last chance to put it down under control. That decision created a problem no amount of SAS training could remove. The pilot and the patrol commander didn't agree on their precise position. The patrol had been meant to begin from a known point near its reconnaissance objective. Instead, fog and uncertain navigation placed it somewhere several miles from plan, in one of the least forgiving landscapes in the operation. Tierra del Fuego isn't a blank white space at the foot of a map. It's a region of cold water, wet ground, hard wind, remote settlements, and an international border that is easy to draw with a pen, but difficult to cross while carrying weapons, food, radios, and explosives. Accounts differ over the first landing area. Chilean reporting places the group near Hacienda Cameron on the Chilean side of Tierra del Fuego. British and SAS-centered accounts describe the patrol as short of its intended Argentine insertion area. The uncertainty matters because it demonstrates the problem at the heart of Plum Duff. Neither the exact landing point nor the resulting ground route is securely established in the historical record. The Sea King itself continued toward Chile. Its crew were expected to destroy it after dropping the SAS patrol. That was part of the plan from the beginning. The helicopter couldn't fly back to HMS Invincible. It had to disappear. In Chile, the crew destroyed or burned ZA-290. Hutchings, Bennett and Imrie then moved on foot through Chile, trying to avoid immediate exposure and eventually make contact with British officials. They were later detained by Chilean authorities and returned through diplomatic channels. That Sea King flight is often told as a dramatic aviation story. It was more than that. It was the moment the grand assault plan lost the clean, controlled geometry drawn on staff maps. Mikado depended on reconnaissance. Plum Duff had been meant to provide it. Instead, the patrol had lost its intended insertion point in fog. The aircraft had been destroyed in Chile, and the people on the ground had to decide whether their mission could still continue. Captain Andy Legg made that decision. Legg judged that his patrol had been compromised. Plum Duff was aborted. That much is the historical core. Legg commanded the SAS patrol. He concluded that it was compromised. The mission didn't produce the reconnaissance that Mikado required. But the word compromised has accumulated stories around it. Some later retellings describe Argentine troops finding the SAS. Others describe radar tracking, a patrol on the ground, lights in the distance, gunfire, civilian witnesses, or a sudden Argentine alert. These versions are compelling because they create an obvious explanation for the abort. The available evidence does not establish one. No corroborated Argentine record in the available accounts shows that Argentine forces detected Legg's patrol. No confirmed radar track links Argentine defenders to the SAS team. No documented interception appears in the record. There is no verified firefight, no proven pursuit, no named Argentine unit ordered to find the patrol because of Plum Duff, and no confirmed civilian report that triggered a response. That does not mean Argentine forces definitely didn't see something. It means the historical evidence does not allow us to turn Legg's operational judgment into a confirmed Argentine discovery. Legg's own later recollection adds detail, but not final certainty. He recalled being told that the helicopter had been detected on radar. He described lights and a flare near the intended insertion area and concluded that the patrol was clearly compromised. Yet those details appear in a retrospective account, not in a contemporaneous operational log that can establish precisely what Argentine forces saw, heard, or did. The difference is important. A patrol commander does not need a court of law's standard of proof before deciding his men are in danger. Legg had to assess weather, navigation, food, equipment, the state of the team, the loss of the helicopter, and the possibility that the operation's cover had gone. He was on the ground in a remote border region with a reconnaissance mission that had already failed to begin as planned. His judgment was operationally decisive. Its trigger remains unproven. One later account describes the patrol trying to move east toward the Argentine frontier after reaching Chile. It records exhausted men, cold weather, a man becoming ill, food running low, and satellite phone batteries failing. Legg later said his patrol had only 3 days' rations while carrying weapons, ammunition, and explosives. The weather and logistics weren't background problems. They imposed a clock on every decision. A 9-man patrol can't simply walk indefinitely through unfamiliar terrain and remain covert. Every extra day means more hunger, more fatigue, more chance of contact, and less capacity to establish the observation post that was the mission's purpose. Legg eventually sought support in Chile. His men made contact with authorities and British diplomatic channels in Chile before moving north. Plum Duff ended without a confirmed observation post at Rio Grande, without a reliable report on the base's layout, and without the intelligence Mikado had been created to exploit. The main assault now faced its central problem. British planners had proposed sending Hercules transports into a heavily defended mainland airbase because the Exocet threat was urgent. But the reconnaissance intended to confirm target locations, assess defences, and preserve surprise had not succeeded. At the same time, wider concerns were growing. British intelligence reassessed Argentine radar coverage. The runway landing concept already carried severe risk for the RAF crews and SAS troops. The political implications of a direct attack on the Argentine mainland were substantial. Bad weather had already shown its ability to disorient a sea king before it could even establish a patrol on the ground. The possibility of losing 2 C-130s and a large part of B Squadron in Argentina was no longer theoretical. Mikado was cancelled. No Hercules transport carrying SAS troops landed at Rio Grande. No runway assault took place. No Super Étendards were destroyed by an SAS force on the Argentine mainland. That is the correction at the centre of the story. Operation Mikado wasn't a failed assault on Rio Grande. It was a proposed assault that never reached execution. Plum Duff's failed reconnaissance was a major reason the plan collapsed, but it wasn't the only one. The record points to a combination of lost or uncertain surprise, weather, inadequate intelligence, radar concerns, the vulnerability of the Hercules aircraft, the danger to the SAS force, political risk, and changes in the wider campaign. Some Special Forces accounts say B Squadron received final notice of cancellation on 3rd of June. That date marks the end of the operation as an active possibility, but the concept had already been eroded by the conditions revealed during Plum Duff. A more cautious alternative was considered. Some accounts describe a possible submarine-based approach involving HMS Onyx and inflatable boats. It wasn't carried out either. Britain's problem had not vanished. The Super Étendards still existed. The AM39 Exocets had not been removed by the operation designed to remove them. 7 days after Plum Duff's 18th May launch, that fact became visible again. On 25th of May 1982, 2 Argentine Super Étendards launched 2 AM39 Exocets during an attack intended to locate British carrier targets. British defensive measures and the missile search combined to draw the weapons away from the carriers. They struck the merchant vessel Atlantic Conveyor. Atlantic Conveyor wasn't a warship. It was a British merchant vessel taken up from trade and modified to support the expedition. Its cargo mattered enormously to the campaign ashore. The ship carried helicopters, vehicles, equipment, and stores needed to move British forces across the Falklands after landing. 3 Chinook helicopters were lost. 6 Wessex helicopters were lost. 1 Lynx helicopter was lost. 45 Volvo BV202 tracked vehicles were lost, along with significant stores and equipment. Aircraft inventories require care because some helicopters had already been flown off the ship or survived by being elsewhere at the time of impact. But the strategic effect was plain. Atlantic Conveyor's loss sharply reduced British battlefield lift. The Chinook was especially valuable. It could move heavy loads and troops across the islands in a way that smaller helicopters couldn't. Without the expected helicopter fleet, British troops had to move more equipment over land, often on foot across difficult Falklands terrain. 12 men died, including Atlantic Conveyor's master, Captain Ian North. The ship was struck on 25th of May. It was abandoned and later sank under tow on 28th of May. The two Exocets that hit Atlantic Conveyor were fired by the same Super Étendard Exocet capability that had made HMS Sheffield a warning on 4th of May. The threat that drove Britain to contemplate an assault on Rio Grande was still operating after Plum Duff had aborted and after Mikado had been cancelled. That chronology isn't a counterfactual verdict. No evidence can prove that Mikado would have reached Rio Grande successfully. No evidence can prove that its SAS force would have destroyed the necessary aircraft and missiles. No evidence can prove that it would have done so before 25th of May. And no evidence can prove that Atlantic Conveyor would have escaped the Exocets if the raid had gone ahead. But the stakes are measurable. On 4th of May, an Exocet struck HMS Sheffield and killed 20 men. On the night of 17th and 18th of May, a Sea King carrying Captain Andy Legg's SAS reconnaissance patrol flew through fog toward Tierra del Fuego, lost confidence in its position, and left the patrol without the insertion Mikado required. Legg judged his team compromised. His decision to abort is documented. Argentine detection isn't. The planned SAS raid didn't follow. On 25th of May, 2 more Exocets struck Atlantic Conveyor, taking helicopters, vehicles, stores, and 12 lives with them. Operation Mikado wasn't the raid its name seems to promise. It was a proposed mainland assault stopped by a reconnaissance mission that had dissolved into weather, distance, uncertainty, and one commander's judgment that his patrol couldn't continue. 7 days later, Atlantic Conveyor burned in the South Atlantic, carrying the helicopters and stores that would never reach the Falklands.